We're in a situation in the economy right now where, stability, instability, the monetary system, influx, crashes, panics, all these things are affecting not only major markets, but we as the individuals. And I can't think of a better person to come up and to come up and share with us insights would be the Honorable Edmund Moy, who's the 38th Director of the U.S. Mint, right? And also a consultant in the financial industry now. So he writes for the Wall Street Journal, right? So, and it took a lot of work to twist his arm and get him to come out and address us. So let's give him a big hand and welcome him up to the stage. So Mr. Edmund Moy.
Thanks so much, Stephen, for that introduction. Normally when I get a great introduction, it was when I was Mint Director, and people expected to get some free samples after they said some nice words about me. I've already been asked this question once, so I'll answer it right up front so I don't have to answer it when I see you socially, and that is, what was the best thing about being Mint Director? I could point to increasing our profits to $1 billion, addressing the need for precious metal bullion during the financial crisis. Could go through all that stuff, but my biggest, what I appreciated most about being director of the Mint was personal reason. And that is my dad, who's been very frustrated with all my career choices. He comes from China, and really being financially successful is very important to him. And every time I was about to make some really big money in the private sector, I would get a call from the President of the United States saying, I really need you to come in and fix Medicare. I really need you to come in and help me staff the government. And then so when President Bush finally, and my dad never understood any of that. And so when I finally got my appointment to the Mint, that was something my dad couldn't understand. So I went, Dad, you wouldn't believe it. President Bush and Treasury Secretary John Snow just decided that they would like me to become the next director of the United States Mint. And my dad said, yes, finally, my son has a job where he makes a lot of money. I didn't have the heart to tell him that. None of it was mine, and I didn't even get a discount on that. You should also know that I don't speak at a lot of Bitcoin conferences. I get a lot of invitations. I'm very selective, and I do them less on how many people are in the audience or how big the group is. I do it more for the type of speakers and the direction of the conference. And this one was very appealing to me because Stephen put together a number of interesting topics with some speakers that aren't part of the normal Bitcoin circuit. And so as a result, that's why you see me here. And so Stephen, thank you so much for creating such an interesting conference. I'm happy to help you kick it off. So you might ask why the former director of the United States Mint is standing in front of you talking about Bitcoin, and what do I know about Bitcoin, and where did I gain that interest? Well, as you can see, I'm old school. So I'm wearing a Savile Row suit. I look old school, and I don't think. There's one suit over there. Yes, thank you. But, so I'm very much of a traditionalist because I believe that there are some things that ought to be preserved. And as a result, politically, I'm a conservative. I lean toward free market economics. And when I take a look at Bitcoin, especially talking to all you out there, you all come at it from a lot of interesting perspectives that are fascinating for me. Many of you come at it from a technology perspective. Some of you come at it from a political perspective. Others come at it from an economic or business opportunity perspective. But the unique perspective that I come from is, unless we have Bitcoin miners out there, I think I'm the only one here that's ever made currency, and also for the largest economy in the world. And from that perspective, I've had to become a student of the history of currency and what are the key elements that make a functional currency. And when I looked at that history and applied it to Bitcoin, so if you track it from the earliest forms of money to the present, and you analyze it on the basis of what makes a functional currency, what are the criteria, you will see hopefully like me, a very compelling case for why Bitcoin is the next step in the evolution of currency. And so that's why I wanted to spend a few minutes walking through it. It's a short presentation. I put together a chart that is, I couldn't find anything else out there, so I think I'm breaking a little bit of new ground, but I know I'm talking to a lot of smart people. So I want you to pay attention, and afterwards give me some feedback, because I know that this can be refined to become more accurate and better, because I think it'll help a lot of people think through this. So I'd like to start. So where do I get this criteria from? Well, it just happens that Aristotle did a lot of thinking about what makes currency useful. And he had a number of criteria, and then I added two things onto that criteria. But his criteria, which I think has lasted, the test of time, he said a functional currency ought to be durable, which means it's unchanged, right? So through use, it's still valuable at the end of a lot of use as it was at the very beginning. The essence of its value has not changed over that period of time. And how can it change? If you made a coin out of copper oxidizes, and that oxidation reduces the amount of copper in a coin, which means it weighs less and therefore has less value over a period of time. Another aspect is that it was portable. And so he was taking a look that functional currency had its best advantage when you had a high value relative to its size. And so if you made coins out of bronze, which were relatively common and heavy and dense, but because it was more common, it wasn't worth much, that was a problem. But if you made it out of gold or some rare metals like palladium or platinum, that would have a much higher value in its currency. That currency would be worth or be more functional because it used a high-value item and it was really small. Divisible. It needed to be easy to separate. So a $10 bill can be separated into two $5 bills, and a $5 bill can be separated into 5 singles and then reassembled into that amount. So that was another thing that Aristotle was very interested in. He also wanted fungibility, which means it's mutually interchangeable. So $1 could be easily substituted for another dollar, and that dollar could be traded for, a small, couple grams of gold, and that gold could then be changed to something else, which could then be changed back to the dollar. That there'd be that type of mutual exchangeability. And last of his criteria was intrinsic value. And he wanted money not to represent something. He wanted money to actually have value in its essence. So it should be worth something independent of anything else. And then I added two things that he didn't have, which I think are essential, especially to modern currency. One is trust. So when you do a deal between two friends and there's mutual trust, seldom do you check whether or not everything's all there. But if two people who don't know each other are doing a transaction, how do you know the value is being transferred exactly like what the deal was supposed to be? And so that's that trust issue. And then lastly is payment ease. And that is every transaction has a certain amount of friction to it. And the most successful functional currencies have the littlest friction when that transaction happens. So what happens when you take these criteria and compare them to money since the beginning of time? And I believe you're going to make a compelling case for why Bitcoin's the next step. Earliest currency was commodity-based currency. So people determined that because there was a lot of demand for wheat, a bushel of wheat would be a standard currency amount that could be traded for other things. So when you look at that, a lot of these commodities, so that's a minus sign, means it wasn't great. A 0 means it was neutral, and a plus means that it was pretty functional. So durability, because a lot of commodities are organic, they spoil. And so that a lot of the early commodity-based money was not very practical and functional. Portability, because commodities are grown in such large volumes, they're not rare, and therefore they're fine for a small transaction. I'll trade you 3 bushels of wheat for a pair of shoes, but try buying a car with wheat. It just becomes very impractical. Divisible. Yeah, certainly you can take a bushel of wheat and divide it in half. But if you were selling iron and you had 10 pounds of iron and someone wanted 5, got a problem with divisibility there. Fungibility, of course, that all happened within that bargaining arrangement. So, you have this double coincidence of wants. I might have a bushel of wheat and I might need shoes, but the shoemaker has no interest in wheat at that moment in time. But they want eggs, so I have to go out to somebody to trade wheat for eggs, get the eggs, and then go to the shoemaker to get shoes. Harder to have that mutual exchangeability. Intrinsic value, there's certainly intrinsic value in whatever that volume of commodity was. And the trust level was pretty negative because when 2 friends were doing deals, you kind of trusted that there was no barley in the wheat and that bushel of wheat was capped off to where it needs to be. But if you were 2 strangers, you'd have to have some type of verification process. And lastly, payment ease. Well, it was a pretty simple transaction because 2 people were doing a deal. They made that mutual exchange. But it wasn't an particularly easy transaction, particularly the larger it got. The next evolution happens to be coins. So coins, the first coins that we have came around 700 AD. It was called the Slater. They found it when they were excavating the Temple of Artemis, which was near Lydia. Lydia was an ancient city that was on the coast of Turkey. And what they ended up finding was they thought they were initially tokens, but what they found was each token had very specific weight. And so when you had 1 Slater versus a 1/10 of a Slater, 1/10 of a Slater weighed 1/10 of what 1 Slater was. And so they found this ratio relationship between all the different coins. And so what you had with coins were a lot more durable because you made them out of metal. They were much more portable than commodities. Divisibility, a Slater went down to 1/76 of a Slater. So that was a huge technological jump forward for early money. Fungibility definitely improved from commodities. The notion of what was used in the coin had value, so it had intrinsic value. The trust level definitely improved, especially when the early coins were likely made by individuals, finding whatever metal was commonly agreed upon as having value, and then self-stamping the coins. Well, then, it was all based on reputation. And so if you were in a small town and you knew the 3 people who were making coins and the coins' designs came from someone you trusted, you basically trusted that. So the trust level went up, but still you had a problem if you were trading with someone in a different town for the first time. They wouldn't know that coin had X amount of metal in it. They'd have to weigh it all over again, and so you'd have to slow down in that transaction. And, of course, the payment ease was, I believe, the same amount, the same functionality as commodities. The big change came in around 500 BC, also with the Lydians, also with the Slater, and that was the combination between gold and coins. Gold was a very valued commodity because it was shiny. It didn't oxidize. It was viewed as a special metal. It was very malleable, so people believed it was concentrated sunshine, which they ended up making religious artifacts out of. And so as a result, gold itself had a commodity value. This was codified in the Code of Menes. Menes was a legend of the first person who united the northern Egypt and southern Egypt. And there was a law, a codified law into government, where in that law, we have actual documentation. He said gold should be worth twice as much as silver. So 2 ounces of silver to 1 ounce of gold. And he also made the argument, too, of what a bushel of wheat was equivalent to X amount of barley, et cetera, et cetera. And so the key change here was gold specie, which is one version of a gold standard, and it were coins made out of gold. And that changed everything in the ancient world. That accelerated the ancient world through a bartering economy to full international trade. It propelled countries to go after gold deposits and conquer and language and culture and all that stuff. So what did gold do? First of all, gold was extremely durable because unlike bronze or silver or copper, which all oxidized, gold did not. It had ultimate durability. It was portable. So there was a lot of value because gold is the densest commonly used metal. So you could pack a lot of value in a very small package. Third, it was very divisible because gold was very malleable. It could be cut down into really small sizes. Fourth, it was fungible. Gold deposits are found almost equally spread throughout all civilizations. So everybody had access to gold, and all these civilizations independently came to the conclusion that gold was worth something. And so you brought gold and you traded from Rome to China. They understood gold, and trade could go back and forth. Fifth, intrinsic value. Because gold was a value commodity prior, it was really easy for everyone to just impugn that commodity value onto the gold. Then we get to trust. As long as you knew what the purity was and the weight was, you could have mutual trust between all the parties. And lastly, payment ease, because, again, gold was widely accepted as having value throughout all the world, regardless of civilization. It was much easier to do transactions using gold. And so the gold standard has roughly survived from 500 BC to 1971. And during that time, you've had the greatest change in the prosperity of the world through various economic systems because of the gold standard. There's another way the gold standard happened, and that's the gold exchange standard. So what gold exchange is in the United States, we had the example of gold certificates. You had a $20 bill that was a gold certificate, and what that meant was you could take that into the issuing bank, and they would trade it, exchange that bill for $20 worth of gold. And because gold at the time that we had that gold certificate was $20 an ounce, you would get 1 ounce of gold when you turn that in. So the bill itself was worthless, except that it was basically a paper commitment to exchange it for real gold. And so from that, the paper itself didn't have much durability, but the exchange into gold did. So that's why you see a 0 and a plus. It was very portable, even more portable than gold coins. So when you take a look at a gold coin, this is a gold coin. This is a double eagle, so it was worth $20 back in the day. It was 90% gold, 10% other metals to make it strong. Even though it was 90% gold, it still has 1 ounce of gold, so it weighs more than an ounce. Now, this is fine because today it's worth $1,170 as of this morning. But when you try to buy a house with this, that transaction becomes very cumbersome. But if you end up having a gold exchange standard and come up with the equivalent of bills, it becomes much easier. Again, it's divisible, it's fungible, the intrinsic value, again, the paper itself has no intrinsic value other than it's a claim on the equivalent amount of gold from the issuing bank. Trust here, you had to trust that the bank would exchange it. it's no longer when I give you a gold coin and you give me whatever goods from there, we know that there's gold in here. And so therefore, it's you don't need that much trust. But when you have a bill from the Reserve Bank of Kansas City that's a gold certificate, you have to trust that that bank would actually give you gold for it. And what Americans learned in 1933 was that was the end of that, because Roosevelt at the time began taking us off the gold standard and banned Americans from owning monetary gold, and all Americans had to turn in that gold in exchange for the equivalent of a bill, but the bill was not a gold exchange bill. It was just plain fiat currency. And then we get to payment ease, has the same ease of payment as gold specie does. So that leads up to fiat currency. And fiat currency came into being in the United States beginning in 1933, but became fully fiat currency in 1971 to 1973. And the reason why I say that is after World War II, there was a conference in Bretton Woods where all the finance ministers got together and said, how do we stabilize the world economy? And the agreement was we could never go back to the gold standard because we printed up so much money to fund the war. There's not enough gold based at that price to support that. So what we'll do is, because the United States has the strongest economy and has the most amount of gold, we will make the U.S. dollar exchanged to gold only for foreign governments. And all the other currencies will be based off the U.S. dollar. So kind of gold exchangeability, but one step removed. And then in 1971, Nixon said, that's it. We're not going to exchange any more U.S. dollars for gold. And so that's when a complete break in the gold standard happened. And we went totally fiat currency. Fiat comes from the Latin meaning by decree. So it's fiat currency because on your bills today, it says that it's legal tender. And so even though it costs 4 cents to make a bill, you have to take it at face value because the government says you have to take it at face value. There's nothing backing that other than the government's promise that it can fully pay off its debts, which is based on the 14th Amendment. But so now we've gone from having currency being anchored into intrinsic value to being completely decoupled from that. So what happens on the criteria? Well, paper is not very durable. In normal velocity of money, a paper bill might last 14 months. In the United States, it might last 2 months in a hot, humid African country. It is portable, so whether it's paper or electronic, you can still carry a lot of it around you, but there's not a lot of programs where you can use U.S. dollars off your mobile phone. It's certainly divisible. It's fungible. Its intrinsic value goes to negative. Its trust value, now you're putting that trust on a third party completely, which is the governments that back that currency. And payment ease, on one way it's good, but in another way, all these financial highways that have been built by the banks and the credit card companies and the money transfer companies now have government police at each step of the way saying, here are the speed limits, here are the tolls, here are the fines, et cetera, which then slows down that money. Try to transfer $100 via Western Union from here to El Salvador, and you'll find out exactly what I mean. So then we get to the last part. Where does Bitcoin fit into all this? Bitcoin, I believe, is very durable because it's created to having a permanent electronic footprint. At the same time, because it's electronic, if you watch the TV program Revolution and all of a sudden the nanites turn off all the electricity everywhere, well, that money disappeared. But whenever the electricity kicks back in again, you can find it. Portability dramatically improves under Bitcoin. It doesn't matter if I have 1 Bitcoin or 1 million Bitcoins or 21 million Bitcoins on this. So the portability dramatically increases. Divisibility, unlike gold, which if you divide it up into too small of amounts, you can't verify the grams, and when you assay it, you actually destroy that value. Divisibility goes to 9 digits so far, which is probably more than this world is going to need in our particular lifetimes. So it has the advantage of almost infinite divisibility. Fungibility, there are some issues. Great for the D Hotel for taking Bitcoin, but where you can buy things with Bitcoin, it is extremely fungible. And so that will grow as the ecosystem grows. Intrinsic value, so here's the interesting thing is, on one hand, fiat currency doesn't have any intrinsic value in it at all, and it's backed by basically your faith in the government's ability to support that currency. You could make an argument that Bitcoin doesn't have any value at all because it's just a collection of electrons. But at the same time, I believe it has value like gold has value, because there's great interest now in the blockchain to be used as a permanent ledger to record the transfer of value, and there's a lot of investment money coming into that, much like gold has other uses besides being money. It could be used as gold foil for architectural details. It could be used for jewelry and a whole other things. And those other uses help support the price of gold beyond what the financial demand is. And just like Bitcoin's other uses in Bitcoin 2.0 makes investors want to hoard some of these Bitcoins and use the blockchain. And because of that, that also brings monetary support to the intrinsic value behind Bitcoin. And where it doesn't is done on exchanges where you can trade $1 for a Bitcoin and a Bitcoin into a euro, etc. And what I would argue is the free market then determines that intrinsic value based on what the perceived value of Bitcoin to the user is at that moment in time. And then we get to the trust factor. Because of the blockchain, there is a trust factor unlike anything else that's out there from an electronic and technological perspective. And then finally, payment ease. To skip the financial highways and just go to a peer-to-peer transfer with the durability of the internet, to me, makes the payment ease dramatically easier than any other electronic transaction out there. And so with that, you can just see the history of money from all its functional criteria and take a look at how well Bitcoin scores. And so, I base my opinions on fact. And when I take a look at this evolution, it tells me that there's tremendous potential behind Bitcoin. So let me just stop there. And I know we can all quibble because this is a subjective analysis, but I'm also willing to hear your arguments later on where I'm really wrong and I need to change. But I just want to stop here and leave a few minutes for any Q&A that you might have.
A second. Okay. Thank you, Ed, for that great presentation. And I always love when someone holds up gold. And Ed's been gracious enough to...
I got something else to show everyone. So everyone talks about fiat currency and intrinsic value. I was recently in Belgrade consulting with the central bank there. And at one of the street markets, I bought a note that was under the Yugoslavian government. It's a dinar note. Can anyone guess what this denomination is? 500 billion dinars, right here. But that's not the highest denomination bill that's ever been in circulation. That distinction goes to the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. Does anyone know what this denomination is? 100 trillion. That's right, 100 trillion dollars, Zimbabwe dollars. And so, whereas when you take a look at the gold standard has remained extremely stable for 2,700 years. And you take a look at fiat currencies and the history of every failed fiat currency since China started it, at the first millennium, has always ended in this. It might take 40 years, 70 years, 100 years, but eventually you get to 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars.
Awesome. So this is a great time for some Q&A. So let's start over here with Tone. And if you have questions after each, we've got a little bit of time, maybe about 5 minutes. So let's direct your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Moy, for coming out
Yep.
and speaking at the conference. Sorry, my voice is still a little bit of a mess, but I made it. So I have a question. I have two questions, but I'll stick with just stick one. What are your views on initiatives started by the U.S. like FATCA, which make it very difficult to do global financing and banking, and what is it doing to the world economy, in your opinion? And do you think Bitcoin can help in that effect, where people just ignore some of that because they just want to do business?
Yep. So I'll come at it from the perspective of just my own political and economic biases as someone who believes that the free market can be a much more efficient allocator of capital than the government can. And so what you're really taking a look at here from a different, same problem, but from my perspective, is the government monopoly of money. And monopolies get inefficient over time. And instead of getting more efficient, what monopolies do is fight to maintain their monopoly power, which is exactly what you're seeing in these particular moves. When I look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin is a free market alternative to the government monopoly on money, because if it's decentralized nature, it becomes very difficult for a government to manage that. And what will happen over time is as people embrace the greater utility of cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin, those will grow because the market will find a way to honor what that demand is.
Great.
So, yes.
I'm sorry. No, did that answer that question there, Tone? You got that? Yeah, good. Okay. All right. After Steve, let's go with Mark here.
It's a real pleasure to be in the same room with a multi-trillionaire. Thank you. So I was wondering if when you were making this list, you were wondering the same things I was wondering, is there going to be a column 7? When you look at at the rows here, are we at the end of, say, payment ease or intrinsic value or fungibility as far as currency goes? Has Bitcoin solved those problems completely, or is there something that could be, say, in column 7 that may add plus signs beyond where Bitcoin had plus signs?
That's a really good point, Mark. And what I believe in is we are in the process of seeing a major evolutionary step in functional currency. And some of the things that Aristotle was thinking about just no longer apply in a modern economy, and there's going to be different criteria that will emerge from that, and based on these technological innovations, I think money is going to move in a more advanced direction. Now, saying that, I also believe that in this transition, it'll be an evolution and not a revolution. So, in other words, we'll still have various modes of currency and payment systems of which consumers will use whatever is the most convenient and most secure for the particular transaction they're doing, right? So I still use a $20 bill when I'm buying Altoids at Walgreens because I just don't want to spend $2.50 on a credit card. But I am not going to Best Buy with $1,000 coins to buy my flat screen TV. And so I believe that these various currencies and payment systems will coexist with each other, but the proportion that they're used will vary over time based on consumers believing that it's in their best interest to start using these.
Fantastic. Susan here.
Hi, thank you again. Brilliant presentation. So do you believe, based upon maybe meetings you sit in or coffee conversations you have, that the U.S. government sees digital currency as any sort of threat, or does it just want to regulate it so it tries to get it to go away?
Yep. It's a really interesting question, and there's two-part answer. One is Bitcoin's too small for the federal government to think that it's a threat. But I know individuals, personal friends of mine at the Federal Reserve that are on study committees that are analyzing all this. And so it's certainly reached the attention of the government. On the regulatory side, because there is no law out there that regulates Bitcoin, but Bitcoin does many different things, right? It can be viewed as a digital commodity. It can be viewed as a money transfer, a whole bunch of different things. What ends up happening is each government agency can only regulate on the basis of its statutory authority. And where that statutory authority intersects that aspect of Bitcoin that's in their world, so the Commodities Future Trading Commission views Bitcoin not as a currency, it views Bitcoin as a digital commodity. And when people buy and sell and trade that, are they obeying everything that a commodity needs to obey? Whereas the IRS, they don't care about the commodity. What they care about is a taxable event. And so without overall legislation, each agency is going to figure out its own hodgepodge, causing this complicated patchwork. Now, it can work because health insurance is managed by a patchwork of 50 state insurance commissioners regulating it, and not the federal government. But at the same time, where the government needs to come through here is you're basically creating a much more efficient payment system through Bitcoin that doesn't fit, that avoids the banking financial highway, that avoids the credit card financial highway, that avoids the money transfer highway. And so I liken it to we've just invented a solar-powered flying car. The government has a choice. Do we force the flying car to fly above the roads and obey the stop signs and the speed limits, or do we come up with a new scheme to figure out how they fly in the air without bumping into each other? It's a lot easier for government to do A than it is B. And that's what's happening now.
Thank you. Stephen.
Stephen Sprague from Rivets. So you asked at the beginning if there were some thoughts and suggestions. There might be the concept of another row, because one of the really interesting aspects is that Bitcoin has the potential to be money with policy, in that attached to the money, as has been done in the past with currencies issued by corporations or by governments for special types of payments, that Bitcoin can have a much more specific application of policy. Today it's rendered in the concept of multiple signature mechanisms, but there's so much more that's possible in the type and style of money. Money for a 4-year-old. What can the 4-year-old spend money on versus the 14-year-old versus others? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a really interesting aspect of there's a whole other row in this process over time that has had money with policy.
That's a really good point. And I've also had other thoughts in that area. For example, money didn't become useful. So the early tokens that were made by individuals, that didn't catch on until government finally decided to make the coins. And then when government started doing it, as long as you trusted the government, you could trust the coins that they make, and then you could do commerce without second guessing. And so the early money was made by individuals. It was total democratization of money. With Bitcoin, we see the ability to go back to the original roots of money. When you talk about it from a policy perspective, there's this re-democratization of money then, because this has been created without the federal government's imprint, right? And individuals have total control over that money. So anyway, there's multiple interesting aspects on the policy. The other thing too is this also, to me, as as a free market person and as someone who believes in democracy in its smallest form, what governments ended up doing early on, and the Lydians caught this when they started making coins, they put the symbol of their government on the coins, and eventually rulers made it onto the coin, combining money and power. And what they were saying to all the citizens is, your well-being is integrated with the government. And what Bitcoin tells me is, no, we don't need governments to manage our economic systems anymore. It goes back into the hands of people.
Wow, what a great one to finish on there. Let's get everyone give Ed a great big round of applause. Thank you, Mr. Edmund Moy.